Okay. Well, it's 9:02, 9:02 in the morning here in Mississippi. I just checked. The temperature stated it was 85 degrees and feels like 92 at 9 o'clock in the morning. So that's great and awesome. Today, we're going to get into our lesson, and the title of our lesson is How Should I Respond to Politics? And I'll be the first to admit that this was a very hard lesson for me to do. I have a lot of anger with our current government and the way things are going, and I'm sure that some other people do also. And I try to avoid as much of it as I can. So when you do a lesson like we're going to do today, it just drives home a lot of things that you don't want to face, that you don't want to have to deal with. So again, this is a tough lesson for me. I got angry as I was reading it, and I was going, how could Paul write these things? What did he know about what we're going through and all of these things? But Paul did know, and Paul went through a lot that you and I have yet to have to go through. So Paul was very familiar with the things. And one of the debates in our, I guess, Christian world, but in our world is, why did Paul write these things? Paul that was so outspoken against the Roman government and the way things were going, and the Pharisees and all of those. Why did he write these things that seems to support the Roman government and what was going on? Well, we'll read about that and get started. The point of our lesson today is reflect Christ in how you interact with politics and government. Our passage, Romans 13, 1 through 10. In the instructor book, Bible Meets Life, it states, the United States is divided over important issues. Each side in the political arena is convinced they are right. Consequently, passions run high, and the rhetoric and debate is often less than civil. While Christians may not like certain politicians, God calls his people to respond not based on emotion, but with actions that honor government and its leaders. A love for Christ and a love for others is to permeate every way we engage in and express ourselves in the political arena. The setting, after explaining the theology of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that was Romans 1 through 8, and addressing the issue of Israel's rejection of that gospel, chapters 9 through 11 of Romans, Paul wrote of the practical implications of the gospel for the lives of believers. One of those implications was how the gospel should affect a believer's view of and relationship to governing authorities. This topic was particularly appropriate for the believers in Rome who were living in the heart of the Roman Empire. So the first question that it asks there is, what do you recall about your initial experiences with an election or government? And I can remember back when I was younger, and I don't know if it was this way for everyone, and I'm not highly political, as I just mentioned, but I remember that getting to vote and put my name on something, and it was rather exciting to me to actually say, hey, I participated in this. Years later, it proved that I may have made a poor decision. I think I did at the time. But you all had your own initial experiences, and I'll take this moment to encourage you to participate in our local governments, to participate in our, and I say local government, I mean governments in general, to participate in elections, to participate in voting. I would ask you to stand up and make a stand against certain things. And today, sadly, in our culture and where we're at, it's not so much a stand for someone, it's a stand against someone else, because we have such a poor selection of people to vote for. And I know that I'm turning this more into political talk than anything, but I think a lot of you will agree with me. We don't have a lot of great choices presently to support our Christian beliefs, and that's where I'm headed with this particular talk. So, as we get into our lesson, I'm going to read, out of both books, the student book and the instructor book. But in the Bible Meets Life in your student book, and again, this is the Christian Standard Bible interpretation, and this is the lesson that we use for the young people, but you can follow along, and once we get into the lesson, some of it will be very close. But in this Bible Meets Life, the one thing that I wanted to hit on here was the phrase, the end justifies the means, is often associated with Niccolo Machiavelli. He wrote in one of his works, "For although the act condemns the doer, the end may justify him." Machiavelli apparently believed that if our goal is good, then we are free to use whatever means needed to achieve it. Many Christians seem to embrace the philosophy, but you won't find that in Scripture. In fact, God calls us to a wholly different standard, a standard of obedience and love to Him that will be seen in how we respond to politics and government. So as we get into our lesson, the first verses that we're going to read through come out of Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. I'll give you just a second to make sure you're there. The verses from the Christian Standard Bible Interpretation say this: "Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have its approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. For it is God's servant, an avenger that brings wrath on the one who does wrong." So as we first look at that, when we start to break things down, so let's start off with the question that they do ask, okay? Because we'll get started off hopefully on the right foot here. It says, "How have you seen government benefit you or your community?" Well, it's the things we look around at when we talk about government benefiting us. Well, we have, for the most part, decent roadways to travel on. And even our bad roadways are better than what the people had 200 years ago or even 100 years ago in this country to travel on. And we can get most places fairly easily. We have outreach for our poor. We have outreach for our elderly that help them. We have parks to go to. Some are better than others, but a lot of places use that tax money to pay for parks and different things for the community to be able to participate in. I know here in Corinth, there's a pretty decent park, and they've added on and built to and added new ball playing fields and different things. So, the government, and I know there's a lot of other things, but the government does have a good purpose, and we should not detract from that purpose. Now, that does not mean that we have to agree with everything that the government sticks its nose into or tries to take over. However, we have to be careful about how we respond to that. So let's get back to our verses here. The first thing that we want to talk about is verse 1. Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. The easiest way to sum that up, I think, is God is in control. And yes, there are things that go on, there are things that are said, there are things that are done that you and I as Christians should not agree with. But it tells us that those people are only there because God allows them to be there. If God didn't want them to be there, he would rectify that situation. But since they are there, he is allowing those people to be there. He is allowing those people that power. And it is our responsibility, and we'll give the caveat in a moment, but within reason, it is our responsibility to do the things that those rulers say that we need to do. And that's a tough pill to swallow. It's a tough pill to swallow for me, maybe a tough pill to swallow for a lot of us, but that's what he's telling us, is those people are there, and they are allowed to be there by God. You know, if you remember when we study about the kings of Israel, God was not ready. He was not prepared at that time. And I don't want to say he's not prepared. That's probably a poor choice of words. But when you read the account of how Saul became king, God was not exactly wanting that to happen at that time the way that it happened. God had a plan. God had someone he wanted to be king. But the people pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and they finally got what they thought they wanted, which was Saul. And Saul was most likely a strong-looking man, a very strapping man, possibly handsome, I don't know. But they thought they needed a warrior type man to lead them, and that's what they got. But when you read everything that happened after that, it didn't go well for the most part. Saul's reign was constantly, it was in trouble all of the time and different things going on. It was just not a good situation to be in. So sometimes we have to be careful what we ask for, because we're going to get what we ask for. And I think that for a lot of people, the way that they vote when it becomes election time, if you're just strictly voting down party lines in our country, that's what I'm talking about. Just because you've always been this or you've always been that, so you're just going to vote for that. That's a bad practice. We need to be looking at the history of the person that's there, what their record is. Spend some time delving into not what they say, not what our media says, because we know our media they've been proven to be lying so many times in these recent years that you just can't put a lot of faith in what the media is saying. And then the other thing you have to understand is everybody puts their own slant on things. So you need to spend the time to vote for the person that you think will do the best job for you. And as we move on, so then the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. So what that's saying is if we oppose our government, and by oppose, when I was studying, it generally really meant that we didn't follow the laws of the land. So if you constantly speed, let's use that as an example. wherever you're at. But the highway is the best place. The speed limit is 65. That's the limit. Okay, the minimum's 45. The limit, upper limit, is 65. But I know people, and you do too, and you're probably one of them, that constantly drive above that said speed limit. And they drive, let's just say 75 all the time. 75, 75, 75. And they do that for 3 years. And then sometime after that third year, a cop hits them. Mississippi Highway Patrol. Got them. Hit you on radar doing 75 and a 65. He flashes the lights. He pulls you over. And you're mad because he pulled you over. You're mad because you've driven for 3 years in exceedance of that speed limit, and you've never had any repercussions from that. So you felt like it was your right by that point to be able to do that. And now this guy has stopped you and given you a ticket for speeding. You'll have to go to court or just go pay the fine. And you're mad at them because you didn't know. The point is you were breaking the law of that government. No matter how long you got away with it or how long anybody else gets away with it. You know, a lot of times we try to compare our lives, the things that happen to us, to other people. And we say, well, you know, so-and-so does this all the time and nothing ever happens. It's so-and-so's not who we have to account for. We only have to account for ourselves and what we do. So when we get by with things and then we get punished for breaking that rule and we get mad, that's our fault. We shouldn't do that. That law was there. That law's there for whatever reason it was instituted. And it's our responsibility as Christians to follow that law. And if we choose to break it, or even accidentally, not everyone chooses. Sometimes you're driving along, you got the radio playing, you're on whatever Christian music you're listening to, K-Love radio, and great songs on, and you're singing away, and that foot just gets a little bit heavy, and you get pulled over the one time. Well, the problem is the one time we still messed up. So that's what it's talking about when it's talking about those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. And then here's where I started getting into real trouble in this lesson, and we'll talk through it. Verse 3, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have its approval. And that first part, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. And the first thing I thought about, the first thing that came to my mind was the fact that we have all of these people, and I'm just telling you, for anybody who listens to this or watches this on YouTube or Facebook after the fact, all of these riots that are going on is wrong. I'm not talking about peaceful protests. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the rioting and the looting and the burning and the harm that was inflicted on other people just because you felt slight. All of that is wrong. And then we had government officials in our local governments, in our national government, that some of them went and marched with those people. Some of them supported them verbally online. I mean, on the news. And they supported all that. And they don't want to punish the people who were doing the bad. They want to punish the police officers in general for trying to uphold law. You know, that's where we're at in our country. So what do we do as Christians? And I had a real struggle with that when I look at where we're at. Well, in a moment, I'll give you that answer of what we're supposed to do in these times and with that. But the second half of that says this: do what is good and you will have its approval. Y'all, for the most part, if we will just obey the laws and do what is set forth for us and pay our taxes and all of those things, the government will leave us alone. Now, it's not that way at the present time because they are coming after us in different forms. But they're coming after us as a group and not necessarily, in a lot of cases, as individuals. And I'm talking about for the common American. It's more as a group than not a specific person. So as long as we do what the rules are, we should be okay. And then the last verse, and we'll move on. For it is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. And it's telling us, if we do wrong, just like in our speeding example a moment ago, if we do wrong, then that government has the right to punish us. And that's what it means. Now, up into, now it does say the sword. And generally, that's going to be a figurative thing, just talking about punishment in general. But it could also mean including and up to capital punishment for your crimes. And a lot of people don't want to believe in capital punishment, but it's in the Bible. It's here, and it gives us the right under law to do that. It's not talking about vigilantism. It's talking about a lawful process that gets us to a point. So it's there, and it's in place. All right. In one section here in the instructor book, it says Paul's statement that the authority does not carry the sword for no reason underscores that God has established rulers to both protect the law-abiding citizens and to punish the lawbreakers. And that's what I hit on a moment ago when I see that our government leaders are actually participating in the law breaking. That's tough to look at and know, and then know you have to do what those people say. It's a tough situation to be in. And governments are, they're run by imperfect people. They do imperfect things. Not all of them are Christians. I don't know how many of them, just by the actions that we see, are Christians. And I know that I stuck my foot in a bucket of worms there, but if you look at their actions, there's not a lot there to give us that support. So it's imperfect people doing imperfect things. So we have to be careful of what we say and do, and do that, those things. All right. Romans chapter 13, verses 5 through 7. It says, therefore you must submit, not only because of wrath, but also because of your conscience. And for this reason you pay taxes, since the authorities are God's servants, continually attending to these tasks. Pay your obligations to everyone, taxes to those you owe taxes, tolls to those you owe tolls, respect to those you owe respect, and honor to those you owe honor. Now, when we break this one down, I'm going to flip pages here in my student book. The first thing it says is our testimony shows up everywhere. So as much as possible, Christians should be model citizens. That first part there says, therefore, again, we're in a transition here. Paul's transitioning into something. He's given us the rules over here. Now he's transitioning. You must submit, not only because of wrath. Now, we're not necessarily talking about God's wrath. We're talking about the wrath of the government, them enforcing whatever laws that they have in place, but also because of our conscience. Y'all, God in our life should give us the conscience to want to obey the rules. we have to have that. We have to be different than other people. If we're doing the same things that other people are doing all the time, it's and nothing differentiates us from those people. Where does that really set us? Where does that really put us if you can't tell any difference? We have to be different. God has set us apart. That's what it says. We have been set apart. We are different. And our actions should be different. And the way we live should be different. So we shouldn't do all those things. Our conscience should lead us to do, one, what is right by God, and two, what is right by the government that we're in. And then we get into the tough part that it's talked about before. And for this reason, you pay taxes, since the authorities are God's servants. And we talked about that a moment ago. God has allowed them to be there. Not necessarily that they're Christians, but that he is allowing them to be in that position. Continually attending to these tasks. Pay your obligations to everyone. Okay? Taxes to those you owe taxes. Tolls, tolls. Respect, respect. Honor, honor. So the first two we'll talk about are monetary things. Taxes and tolls. I don't know how many of you have traveled, but there was a time or two in my life when you're traveling along and you're in one of the bigger cities and you exit off, you're trying to get somewhere, and all of a sudden you roll up on this toll booth. Out of nowhere, there's this toll booth. And you've been driving for, 10 hours on highways and roadways and never found one. And then all of a sudden you're trying to get where you're going and there's a toll booth. And it's frustrating because now you're going, well, do I have the change? How do I pay for this? How do I get through this? I don't know if you've ever been there, but it catches you off guard sometimes. Taxes are big things. Man, taxes. I mentioned in our last broadcast, every month, and tomorrow is, today's the 19th, I believe, so tomorrow is the 20th of the month, and I have to have my monthly taxes submitted and paid. And if I don't, not only do I not get that little bit of credit, I think it's 1 or 2%, I can't remember, that they knock off about 2% or so of my owed taxes. Not only do I not get that, but then they add penalties. So I have a 10% penalty and a 1% penalty for paying late. And that hurts too. And I think I've used this story before, but the state government garnished my wages one time. And I got a phone call from my company, and she told me, hey, this is what's going on. We're running out of time, but this is what's going on. And I was like, do what? You know how it is. So I run home from there. I left, I was teaching a class, left it in the hands of one of my other instructors, ran home, and I was going through those. And sure enough, I had forgotten, okay? And I'll try to do this, if I remember correctly, as accurately as possible. I believe this was probably March or April that I was doing this. But I went back and looked in the year prior, and I had paid, let's just say July, August, September, November, December, January, February, and March. I had paid all those months and had forgot to pay 1 month. And that 1 month, they garnished my wages. Well, instead of just garnishing my wages for the average of those months that I had paid, they garnished my wages for considerably more. I mean, a lot more than the average of what I had been paying. So that was another frustrating part of that. Why charge all of this when on average I was nowhere near that? Well, that's the government, and those are their rules, and I missed a payment and they punished me for that. And I ended up getting some of that back in different ways, but that caught me off guard, and it was frustrating to have to deal with all of that. So, and then the second two of those, so we had to pay taxes, pay tolls, but the second two, those are outward things. These next two are inward things, things that are in us. Respect those you owe respect. And what that means is this. It doesn't matter if we agree with them. It doesn't matter if we like what they do, or even if we like that person. It is our job, and I speak slowly because I struggle with this, okay? This is some things I struggle with. It is our responsibility to show respect to a person because of where they're at, their status. That's tough, and it's especially tough at the present time. So we have to remember that. Honor to those you owe honor is the same thing. It's an inward thing that we have to deal with, that we have to do. All right, I'm going to skip on to Romans 13, verses 8 through 10. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes here left. So, do not owe anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and any other commandment are summed up by this commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. And that's what Jesus told them. Jesus said, hey, we've got all these things, but you know what the greatest one is? And I'm paraphrasing, of course. Love. If we would just love, all of those other things would be easy. We'd be able to love God and put no other little gods before him. We'd be able to love our father and mother. We'd be able to love our neighbor. It would be easy not to, as he mentioned here, it would be easy not to commit adultery. You know, it'd be easy not to murder. It'd be easy not to steal or covet. If we just love those people as we should love them. One of the questions that asks here in the books is, what steps can you take to love even those whose politics you disagree with? And that's for you and I to sit down and really think on. What steps can you take to love even those whose politics you disagree with? That's tough. There was something I marked here. I got tickled because in this it referred back to another thing, but it says, instead of seeking to gossip, bully, or harm others, we are compelled by Christ's love to encourage and to build them up. And that's what we should do with our leaders. In the realm of politics, Christians should place a higher value on being a good example of the change Jesus works in our lives. Again, we are different. We should be different. People should be able to look at us, look at our lives, even if they've never actually picked a Bible up and read it, or even seen a Bible maybe, but definitely if they've never picked one up and read it, they should be able to look at you and me and say, there's something different about those people and the way they act, the way they respond, the way they carry themselves. There's something very different about them. And it's because, one, Christ is in our life. Two, because of Christ, we should be able to show love to one another, especially in our Christian realm. It's amazing to me how divisive we are, even among our other Christian brothers and sisters. We're human. We've talked about this many times. We're not going to agree with everything that goes on in our church building or the decisions that our church people make, or we're not going to agree with an individual person. It's just not going to happen because we are humans and we are different. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't love one another. And that doesn't mean that we should carry that grudge because we lost an argument or whatever for the rest of our life. We should be able to move past that. It's a tough lesson. There again, it's very tough on me to read this and to know that it is my responsibility to support those government leaders. Now, let me back up. We've got about 3 minutes left here. I told you I'd give you a caveat. The caveat is this. We're supposed to follow them. We're supposed to honor them. We're supposed to obey them and do what the law says up to a point. And again, I mentioned this a week or two, three back, but to the point where, as in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and a lot of others, they didn't kneel down and worship the king as God. And that got them thrown into the pit of fire. Well, God protected them there. But we should do these things until it crosses over into our Christian walk. And if it goes against what we should do as Christians, that's where we can have our caveat not to do. So don't give yourself up when it comes down to the Christian stance. If it's not a Christian stance, then we should follow them. In our Live It Out section, when it comes to politics, how will you reflect Christ's love? Practice love. We are in a season of elections, so politics is a common topic of discussion. At times, Christians may find themselves on opposite sides on an issue or debate over a candidate. Maintain love for others in your conversations and discussions. Plunge into God's Word. The political issues we face today are not easy. Study Scripture to see how it speaks into the issues. Continually seek to be aligned with God and do so with love and humility. Participate in the political process. Are you an active participant, or do you just complain from the sidelines? Is it important for Christians to influence the discourse in the public square and the political processes? Get active and let your love for Christ be an influence. It says here, the writer says, from my time on the school board up to the present time, I have learned one important life lesson. We can disagree without being disagreeable. We may lose sometimes, but don't fret. God wins in the end. And that's our key. God wins in the end. I appreciate all of you being on. I appreciate you taking your time. We'll be moving into our worship service here in just a few moments. Be sure to sign in on Facebook Live. Brother David will be carrying that. I hope you have a great Sunday. I hope to see you back in our church building here in a few weeks. And I love you all. I appreciate you all. And have a great day.